The world was told that Gobekli Tepe was the cradle of peace, a garden of Eden, where hunter-gatherers put down their spears to pick up the tools of the soul. For decades, the narrative remained unchallenged that abundance birthed religion, and religion birthed the modern world. The 2026 excavation data has officially turned this paradise into a crime scene. We've long been told that this was a site of communal harmony, a proto-temple where the transition to agriculture was a choice made in a time of plenty. It's a beautiful story, a story of humans finally finding the time to dream. But as I stand here, the dust of the pre-pottery Neolithic coating my boots, the stratigraphic record tells a story of desperation, not dreams. The Garden of Eden theory, popularized by early 21st century romanticists, posited that the wild cereal grains surrounding the site provided a free lunch that allowed for the construction of these massive megaliths. When we look closer at the bioarchaeological markers from the 2026 trench, the leisure narrative dissolves. We aren't seeing the bone density of a well-fed, sedentary people. We are seeing the stress fractures of a population on the brink. The opportunity score for this civilization wasn't based on surplus. It was a desperate gamble against a changing climate. The myth suggests that religion was the catalyst for the Neolithic revolution. The temple before the city, as Klaus Schmidt famously put it. But the blue ocean data we've pulled from the latest isotopic analysis suggests the temple wasn't a celebration, it was a prison. The people weren't drawn here by the promise of the divine, they were anchored here by the failure of the wild. The garden was actually a tightening noose of ecological depletion. The popular misconception, the one you've seen in a dozen glossy magazines, is that Gobekli Tepe was a peaceful sanctuary. But there is an intellectual friction here that cannot be ignored. Why build such massive, labor-intensive structures if you are simply a wandering band of foragers? Why bury them? The answer doesn't lie in the stars or in ancient astronauts. It lies in the grit of the soil and the calorie counts of a dying ecosystem. We have been looking at the carvings of lions and foxes as spiritual totems, but the 2026 findings suggest they were warnings. The deeper we dig, the more we realize that the cradle of civilization was actually a pressure cooker. The transition to agriculture wasn't a step forward. It was a retreat from a world that could no longer sustain the hunter. As we peel back the layers of this 12,000-year-old mystery, we find that the fall of Gobekli Tepe wasn't caused by a war or a plague.
Millennia separate
It
us,
was a
yet
collapse
standing here.
of the very ideology that built it. Now, let us peel back the layers of dust and resurrect the truth of this fallen world. The anomaly began with a single anomalous reading in the magnetometer survey of the Northern Plateau. We expected more of the same, more limestone enclosures, more T-shaped pillars, more stylized animals. Instead, the 2026 data revealed structure Z. Unlike the circular enclosures of the early layers, structure Z is a jagged, utilitarian scar on the landscape. It represents a moment of intellectual friction, where the symbolic language of the ancestors was violently overwritten by the cold reality of survival. When we examine the stratigraphic layers of Section 11, we find a jarring transition. Below, the craftsmanship is exquisite, limestone polished to a mirror finish, reliefs of cranes and scorpions carved with a master's patience. But above, In the layers corresponding to the final century of occupation, the artistry vanishes. The pillars are crude, recycled from older monuments. The Garden of Eden hadn't just withered, it had been cannibalized. The anomaly isn't just in the stone, it's in the trash. The TDAR, Digital Archaeological Record, data from the 2026 sifting stations shows a sudden, sharp spike in stress-related consumption. We found thousands of gazelle bone fragments, but they weren't being processed for ritual feasts. They were being smashed for marrow. Every calorie was being extracted with a desperation that borders on the macabre. This is the subject, Göbekli Tepe, the attribute, ecological overreach and resource depletion, and the result, the Great Burying. I remember the morning. We uncovered the bone pit near the western entrance of Structure Z. The romanticists will tell you this was a secondary burial site for honored ancestors. But when we applied the new isotopic mapping techniques, the results were chilling. These individuals didn't die of old age in a land of milk and honey. Their teeth showed deep lines of hypoplasia, permanent scars of childhood malnutrition. They were the first generation of a new world order, a society that had traded its freedom for the safety of the stone circles, only to find the stone didn't feed them. The mystery deepens when we look at the curiosity gap between the site's height and its end. Why did they bury it? The old theory suggested a ritual closing of the temple. But the 2026 sediment analysis reveals the fill wasn't sacred soil. It was domestic refuse, lithic flakes, broken tools, and animal waste. They didn't bury their gods. To protect them, they used their temples as a landfill. The transition from the sacred to the profane was absolute. The human truth we are uncovering here is uncomfortable. We see a society that reached a tipping point, an opportunity score that plummeted as the local gazelle herds were decimated and the wild grasses failed to meet the demands of a growing, sedentary population. The 2026 excavations revealed the anomaly of intent. The site was no longer a place of worship. It had become a fortified granary, a place where the few controlled the dwindling resources of the many. The carvings of predators weren't just religious icons. They were the brandings of a new, harder class of human. As I sift through the tactile grit of desert sand, I find a discarded obsidian blade, its edge still sharp enough to draw blood. It wasn't found in a ritual cache. It was found embedded in the floor of a storage room. The tension is palpable, even 12 millennia later. The garden was failing, and the inhabitants were no longer looking at the stars. They were looking at each other. The final excavation of the 2026 season reached the bedrock floor of the central enclosure, and with it, the Vong Lap To Mo, the curiosity loop, finally closed. What we found wasn't a hidden chamber of gold or a library of ancient wisdom. We found a layer of sterile, packed clay, devoid of life, sealing the site forever. The data-driven resolution is stark. Göbekli Tepe didn't collapse because of an external enemy. It collapsed because it succeeded too well at being a monument and failed at being a home. The open context data reveals a final, desperate attempt to pivot. The subject, Göbekli Tepe, utilized a new attribute, forced sedentism. which led to the inevitable result: total abandonment. The Garden of Eden was a myth we projected onto them to satisfy our own hunger for a lost paradise. The reality is that these people were the first to experience the urban trap. They built something so grand, it required more than the land could give. When the 2026 isotopic data showed that the last inhabitants were eating their seed grain, the mystery of the Great Burying was solved. They weren't preserving a temple, they were hiding a mistake. We look at Gobekli Tepe and see the beginning of our world. But the 2026 excavations remind us that it was also the end of another. The human truth is that we often mistake the architecture of survival for the architecture of glory. As we look toward our own resource-strained future, the silent pillars of Anatolia stand, not as a cradle, but as a mirror.